On today's episode of Exploring Politics, we are going to bring you an interesting discussion on the Trump admin group chat leaks, attacks on Teslas across the United States, and ICE's detention of college students on campus. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Today we have a great panel selected for you. We are going to get into detail on a lot of interesting topics. Today I have with me Matt Barra and Giovanni Pina. We have a lot of great topics to discuss, but first we're going to go to the Trump admin's group chat leaks on discussing the bombing of Yemen. Senior officials in the Trump administration invited the editor of The Atlantic into a group chat. Gio, would you like to give a rundown of what happened there?
Sure thing, Matt. All right, hello, everyone. So, as some of you might have heard, earlier this week, a news reporter from The Atlantic was unintentionally invited into a group chat between senior officials in the White House staff, including Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of State currently, I believe. Secretary of Defense, yes. And the subject of the group chat, in fact, was the possibility of a drone strike on a Houthi rebel group in Yemen, which has been disrupting shipping lanes and causing the price of goods through the Suez Canal and through the Red Sea, I believe, to skyrocket. The issue with this mostly is the fact that a lot of people believe this has revealed a lot of indecisiveness within the upper White House staff from the fact of how people were discussing the possibility of the drone strike. There was a lot of deliberation, there wasn't a lot of clear decisions, and a lot of people are seeing whether or not this is something we're going to have to look forward to for the next 4 years.
Yeah, Matt, do you have any thoughts on that?
Right. I mean, obviously, this was a big mistake by Mike Waltz. Anytime you're dealing with whether classified or unclassified information where we're talking about imminent military attacks, this is something that should not happen. Obviously, I think he accidentally invited Jeffrey Goldberg into this chat. No one actually believes this was intentional. They were using an encrypted sort of texting app that's like Messages, but it's much safer. And he probably just accidentally pressed the wrong name. With that said, I think that the media's attempt to portray this as sort of a nuclear-level threat that should involve Trump firing people in the administration is completely unfounded. Goldberg came out and he said, if this text had been received by someone hostile to American interests, the Houthis would have had time to prepare. So just some great stuff there from Jeffrey Goldberg, who has disseminated numerous hoaxes and misinformation to the American people, now suddenly caring about the interests of the American people. But I actually think that this could help the administration more than harm it. And the reason that I say that is if you actually look at the substance of the text, like you pointed out, Gio, there was a lot of sort of disagreement, but there's a lot of high-level policy discussion, and we see that these people, J.D. Vance, Pete Hegseth, behind closed doors, are the very same people that we see out in public. So I actually think that if there's anything good to come from it, it's that, but this idea that the Trump administration is totally done for, they're going to lose in the polls, I don't think that that's true at all.
Interesting, because what I get from this is there's a gross level of incompetence within the Trump administration. I don't get how you add, it's not even the editor of a more right-wing journal that is in support of Trump and his administration. They added the editor of The Atlantic, who I don't think he has disseminated a bunch of misinformation, but we can agree to disagree on that. But you add someone who is hostile to your administration to a group chat where you are discussing top-level security matters. I think it's not a nuclear-level threat. It isn't talking about bombing another nuclear power. It's talking about bombing a rebel group in Yemen, which, that is still something, is it not? Like, I feel like it does show a level of incompetence, and also the way that things are being discussed in there do not give me a lot of confidence in it. A lot of joking around, they were talking about ensuring that it doesn't damage Saudi oil profits. I feel like it just shows, as I said, a gross level of incompetence that I personally would not want from my nation's administration.
Well, Peter, I think the gross level of incompetence was the fact that the Houthis were actually declared on day one by the Biden administration as a non-terrorist group. The fact is that what this group chat reveals is that Donald Trump and his team are getting the job done. They're the very opposite of incompetent. Pete Hegseth, someone who everyone said was totally unqualified for the job, is out here killing terrorists. Meanwhile, Joe Biden funded terrorists. The Trump administration is ending foreign wars. Meanwhile, the Biden administration started foreign wars. I think that this administration has been completely competent and would be the wrong move at this point for the Trump administration to fire anyone. Obviously, Mike Waltz made a big mistake, but there's been a lot of false hypotheticals. Well, this could have happened, that could have happened. None of that happened. Everything is fine. I think that this deserves certainly a slap on the wrist, and I think that that's what it'll get.
I'm a little confused how you're trying to portray it as Biden didn't fight the Houthis. There were attacks on the Houthis from the U.S. Navy.
Well, sure, I'm not saying
Biden
Biden didn't fight the Houthis, but he was clearly much more, docile in dealing with them. On literally the first few weeks of an administration, he came in, and among the slew of executive orders that were completely harmful to the American people, one of them was declaring the Houthis a non-terrorist organization, which Trump had done in the previous administration. When Trump got back into office, he had to do that because when you declare a group a terrorist organization, you're enabling the military to take more action than they would be able to take otherwise.
I get what you're saying there, but at the time, in 2020, the Houthis weren't doing what they are doing now post, the escalation of the conflict in Israel. After the escalation of the conflict in Israel, the Houthis began taking more violent action, which leads them to now be labeled as terrorists. But under the Biden administration, there was not exactly a need to fight the Houthis. It would be a waste of resources to attack a group who's not really doing anything yet. So now, as it's happening, they start acting. So I think that makes sense that Biden undeclared them a terrorist group, because why would we fight a group that isn't doing anything until they start doing something? Gio, do you have anything to add on this?
Well, let's also not forget that, from the beginning, in Obama's presidency, the Houthi rebels were actually funded in part by the Obama administration, I believe. And I think through that, we take a lot of the responsibility away from ourselves in kind of creating this. But also, if this was a domestic terrorist group, even before 2020, seeing the things that the Houthis were doing, I think we would have immediately taken action and declared them terrorists.
Well, yes, but also if it were a domestic, it would be a completely different situation.
No, that's true, but you have to take a look at who the Houthis have always been. It's been a group that has always been opposed to the U.S., opposed to the West, and has many times stated that they are direct enemies of the United States. And I think that taking action against them, no matter how severe the things they've been doing, is a very big deal. And I think that we should have always taken this seriously. And I am very glad that we are now taking this with the appropriate level of response that we should have been for the last 4 years.
That's exactly right. And the Houthis align themselves with groups that, like you pointed out, Gio, like Hamas, people who call Israel Little Satan and America Big Satan. These are people who would love to kill every American they could get their hands on for no other reason other than they're terrorists and they hate us. I think it was the wrong move for Biden to declare them a non-terrorist organization. He could have went back on that decision after the Hamas invaded Israel on the October 7th attacks, and the Houthis clearly came out in support of that and even launched some missiles into Israel and offered funding for them. They're, of course, Iran-backed. But the point that I'm trying to make is that these text messages show that the Trump administration is competent, that they are getting the job done, I think, for the American people.
I think just because it's showing that they're taking action, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing it in a way that is competent. I think inviting in a reporter from a opposition newspaper is probably not the most competent in action. However, we can agree to disagree on that. We have to move on to our next issue. Would you like to introduce it to us?
Sure. Well, the Party of Democracy not very happy with the democratic outcome of the election. Over the past month, there have been numerous attacks on Tesla facilities, Tesla cars, electric outlets for Teslas. In South Carolina, earlier this month, a 24-year-old man hurled Molotov cocktails at Tesla superchargers and spray painting them with statements against Trump and saying, "Long live Ukraine." Likewise, earlier this month, 7 charging stations were set ablaze in Massachusetts. Gunshots were fired at a Tesla dealership late at night in Oregon. Now, these are just 3 of the numerous, mostly peaceful but slightly fiery protests that have been going on all across the nation. And in fact, these attacks that have targeted Tesla properties have been going on in over 11 states now, we're estimating. So I guess, Gio, what do you think is going on with the Democrat Party right now? I mean, obviously these have been.
It's not a party thing, though, is it?
Well, yeah, of course, they're all.
I mean, we can say it's not an issue of what the party specifically does, but I think that takes a lot of responsibility away from the Democratic Party because, again, these are people that are reflecting the ideals of that voter base. And if you have certain people, obviously they're not representative of everyone. Obviously, a group doesn't have to make public statements that are encouraging these things for them to still happen regardless, just because of either the rhetoric or the dogma that's coming out of the Democratic Party right now.
That's exactly right.
I think you need to focus on something you said too, as well, that the fiery but mostly peaceful, that's something we heard a couple years ago as well. And I think that it reminds us of a time when a lot of things were brushed under the rug that obviously if it was from the other side would have immediately been pointed out, would have been condemned, even condemned by their own party. And I think I really want to see more accountability this time with the media in covering these things that are happening and getting accountability taken for the rhetoric that has been pushed, particularly if it's against Tesla, if it's inciting violence or excusing violence.
And on that point of condemnation, Peter, you say that this isn't a party issue, but if that's the case, why is it that 0 Democrats in Congress have come out and condemned these violent attacks, these acts of terror across the United States?
I mean, because it's an act that, I mean, do you know how many acts of vandalism occur? Do you know how many acts of violent, like racial-based, trans-based, gender-based attacks occur across the United States? I feel like this is an issue that is being not blown out of proportion, but it's a lot of things that are happening, you know, in tandem because people are unhappy with Elon Musk. They are unhappy with the owner of Tesla.
I mean, do you denounce it, Peter?
Do I denounce the? Sure.
There are people throwing. Sure. I mean, I'm sorry, but how is it helpful in any way to throw Molotov cocktails, to throw
I'm
bombs
not saying it's helpful.
At Tesla? And I'm making the point that again, no Democrats have come out. They've been asked. Prominent Democrats in Congress have been completely radio silent, and I would argue they're helping to incite this violence because instead of coming out and saying no, we stand with Elon Musk. This is completely horrible. These are horrible acts.
Well, it's because they don't stand with Elon Musk. I don't stand with Elon Musk.
Well, right, but you can come out and say that these are violent acts that shouldn't be happening like you just did, but members of the Congress are not doing that, and I think that's just completely disgraceful.
I think that if you're a member of Congress, no matter what party lines are, you're not inclined to take action unless you actually are in support of something.
I'm not saying they should take action. I'm saying they should say that is bad, don't do that, and they haven't done that.
Condemnation. And I think when you bring up the idea that it's just how many acts of vandalism or trespass, things like that happen every year, the real question is how much do we need to call someone an enemy of democracy, a danger to democracy, before we start correlating it with how much people are committing violent acts against them. And I think that there is a direct correlation between calling Musk an enemy of democracy.
These people are not drones of the Democratic Party that are just acting on its whim. They are people who have their own lives that have been impacted by cuts made by Elon Musk and Doge.
Yeah, but does that justify
Those cuts have
violence?
been horrible for many Americans.
I mean, what's your point, Peter?
My point is that people are mad, and when people get really mad, they do violent things against the state. They do violent things against people in power, and I think that it's indicative of a massive level of unhappiness with the current administration and with Elon Musk. And do I wish to label that as an entirely Democratic Party action? No, because the Democratic opposition to the Republican Party has always been institutional. That's the reason why I say don't blame this on the Democrats, because the Democrats were seen laughing with Trump at joking with him at Jimmy Carter's funeral. The Democrats, at the end of the day, they still are in the institution. We lost, okay, whatever. They're not having an insurrection like January 6th. The Democrats aren't doing anything like that. But you know who is? It's the dissenters of the Democratic Party.
But you bring up January 6th. I remember when people were up at arms against Trump and Republicans, when, by the way, 70% of Republicans in Congress denounced January 6th.
But I think it's also much worse than this.
But if you weren't, well, that's arguable, but if you weren't, if you didn't clearly denounce January 6th, I remember when Democrats were completely up at arms, when in reality most Republicans did, including Trump, who denounced the people who were violent. But now what we see is the Democrats are completely radio silent, and that's the point.
Because I think this is apples to oranges.
Peter.
One is an institution of democracy. It is a state apparatus. The other is a company owned
The other
by
is
an
people-
unelected official who
the
is now
other-
making gross
well, actually,
decisions
he
that
was-
impact millions
Well,
and have lost.
He was appointed to the agencies
That's
when
exactly,
we elected him.
Doge is part of the reason
Yeah.
why Trump was
A majority of the country did want this to happen. When they say this is what you vote for, we knew this is what we voted for. And I think that
Okay, but
nothing
a
justifies
majority of
violence.
a majority of Americans did not vote for Donald Trump because a majority of Americans, we have what 370 something million people in this country, and how many people voted for Trump? 80 million?
The majority of people who voted for Trump.
Yes, yeah. But then there are also millions that did not vote, millions that
But
were
they
not
know
able to
that
vote.
that's, I mean, don't you know that that's the responsibility that you pick up when you don't vote, is knowing that you could
Okay,
get an outcome that you don't
regardless of that, is what I'm saying is that there are people who could not vote, who might not have been able to for whatever reason, that are now angry, or people that did vote and they did everything they could, and now they're mad because they live in a country where things are being massively changed, people's lives are being uprooted by Doge, because the cuts that we've seen so far, it's only been 2 months so far.
Got a lot of money in 2 months, yeah.
Yeah, cut a lot of money from things that a lot of people rely on. A lot of people rely on FAFSA, and at the moment, a lot of students are unsure if they're going to have it next semester. So I feel like there are a lot of people who are rightfully mad with Elon
So
Musk.
attacking private property is going to help with anything?
No,
agree.
but
I
I'm
don't think
saying
that
that's
ever
what happens when you make people mad.
Right, but I'm saying Democrats should denounce it, and that's exactly why I'm saying this is
Because
a
imagine
party
if
issue.
Republicans were doing this, you know?
And if people came out on the left and said, you need to stop doing this, this is not okay, this is not how we behave in a civil society, I think a lot fewer people
I don't
would
think
stop doing
so.
that. In just a few days,
If you're
there's-
firebombing a Tesla dealership, you're not listening to
in just a few days,
Kamala
there's, in
Harris
just a
and
few
Joe
days,
Biden.
there's going to be a massive protest where people across the country on Saturday are going to go to Tesla facilities and protest. What Democrats ought to do right now is say that you need to maintain the peace, we need to maintain order, but they haven't done that. It's disgraceful.
Well, that's, I feel like, enough on that topic. We could go back and forth for hours, but we have to move on to our next issue, which is the ICE detention of students dissenting against the U.S. government across college campuses. The two that come to mind are specifically Columbia University, which we could spend an hour talking about all of the detentions happening there. And then also recently, the woman on a Tufts college campus in, I believe, Massachusetts, who was detained by ICE going to meet her friends to break her fast during Ramadan. Now, the video, if you've seen, of this woman being detained, the officers that are approaching her are in completely plain clothes. They are not identifying themselves as ICE agents until they have her entirely surrounded. That's a terrifying situation, to have a bunch of plainclothes people who you do not know if they're police officers or what they are, coming and surrounding you and physically detaining you. That's a scary thing that is happening. And then if we go to Mahmoud Khalil, the protester at Columbia University, he's a Columbia grad, who was detained and for a number of days without representation. And then there was talk of deporting him. And the talk of deporting him was not based on any grounds of actual crimes being committed. There was no valid reason for deporting him besides Trump using a statute from, I believe, World War I, the Enemy Alien Information Act or whatever it is, to deport someone who he believes is a threat to democracy, because Mahmoud Khalil was protesting for the right to life for Palestinians. I think that it is a horrible overstep of government to arrest people and deport them simply based on their beliefs. He was not a violent protester, he was a peaceful protester, and that is a violation of his First Amendment right as someone who lives in the United States.
Well, I agree, Peter. It's very scary to have ICE agents knocking at your door, but I think what's more scary is the fact that we have known rapists, known criminals, known sex offenders, and child traffickers in this country. And I think the only problem with
And
the
how
Trump,
many of them are
I
American?
think the only problem with this Trump administration is that they're not deporting enough people. Now, I know we're getting rid of thousands of people a week. I know recently, a few weeks ago, we sent 230 Venezuelan gang members to El Salvador. I think it's great that we're working with El Salvador. President Bukele has done a great job for that country, reducing the crime. I think it raises a major question, which is, why were these people allowed into the United States in the first place? The job of the president, Article 2 of the Constitution, number one job is to enforce the law. That means, by extension, protecting the American people. Now, what we saw in the first few days of Trump's time in office was that ICE agents went to hotels and they knew exactly where to find some of the most horrible people imaginable, which tells me that they knew exactly where to go, which tells me that Joe Biden knew where they were and didn't authorize them to do that.
It's interesting, Matt. I read an article recently. I read an article recently that out of the 3,900 people that were deported as of when this article was written, none of them had officially been charged with crimes.
Well, they all were.
No.
Of course they were. They were all criminals.
Okay, but what you're saying is they're all criminals. What I'm saying is I read an article that said that they were not officially charged with crimes.
Well, were they in the country illegally?
Regardless of that, if you're going to arrest them, you have to charge them and then deport them. You have to give them a right to due process.
But you actually don't.
That's part of our system.
No, it's not. It's actually due process not to, because Trump invoked the Alien Enemies Act.
Yes, but I'm saying invoking that is a violation of human rights. It's a violation of civil rights because you have a right to representation, to a trial, to an attorney.
But I'm saying that you don't.
Okay, but the humanitarian international courts give you that right. International amnesty laws give you that right.
International law is higher than our own. We should look to international law. I mean, that's total nonsense.
I'm saying when we move to a point where we are
people from another country who we are in fact at war with, because we have evidence.
Who are we at war with? That we are we deporting? Who are we at war with right now?
Well, if you let me explain, Venezuela is actively sending people to our country who are very bad to spread their ideology. And what the Alien Enemies Act says is that if you can make that connection, which we clearly have, then you can deport them without due process. And that is the due process.
Okay, I have yet to see any solid evidence that Venezuela is sending agents of chaos.
Well, I mean, people from Venezuela who worked in the administration who came here have said that. The only people who haven't said that is the president of Venezuela.
Okay, I've yet to see any solid evidence, not just people who used to live there saying, I'm here to spread my ideology.
Tren de Aragua worked with Venezuela. Venezuela used them as an enforcer of their government, and now they're
deporting thousands and thousands of people. I would like to see evidence and have evidence presented for each person we're deporting, because we are ruining people's lives potentially, right? If you're getting deported from a country where you live, your life is ruined. You're screwed. So if that is happening, I would like there to be some due process for these people to prove that they are bad. Because otherwise we get in a case where someone could just be apprehended, they don't know why they're there, like the woman detained at Tufts University. If we go back to the issue of college campuses, these are people who have not done anything besides express unhappiness with the current United States government, and that is why they're being deported. They aren't agents of foreign governments. There's a lady from Vietnam that was deported. There was someone from India who is set to be deported, Mahmoud Khalil. I forget exactly where he's from, but he has lived in the United States for a number of years after attending Columbia University. These are people who are not agents of any foreign government. They are not spreading a purposeful dissent to disrupt the United States government. They are people who have ideas about how they want to live in a country, and it is our First Amendment, the first one, that they should be allowed to do so. And they are not here illegally. Those people are here because of education, because of green cards, because of valid reasons to be here. And then those things that allow them to be here are being revoked by the administration. And then, oh, you don't have anything, get out. That's not fair. That's not right. That is a violation of human rights.
Having a green card is a privilege, not a right. The vast majority of people who are being deported are people who are known gang members. 230 of them were deported just a few weeks ago alone. We're getting rid of thousands of people per week. There are 14 million plus illegal people in this country. We have to get them out.
I think when you look at the actual statute that Trump is using to deport people, especially if we're going back to the issue of college students, I think that we do need to address that there are a number of people, however much of a percentage that is of the whole, a number of people that are advocating for organizations that we label as terrorist organizations, such as Hamas, or calling for violence.
It's fair to call
people.
all people protesting for Palestinians protesters for Hamas.
Well, that's the
I think
opposite
that
of what
is
I just said. I just said
a
it's a
horrible
number of them. I said
misrepresentation.
whether or not if it's a large or small amount, I think that there are a number of people who are advocating for those things. And I think that if that is indeed what people are being deported for, I think that that is justified. Whether or not we want to say it's fair, whether or not we want to say it's right, or if it's a nice thing to do, if it makes us happy or sad, I think that it is legally justified if that is exactly what's happening.
All right. Well, we actually are out of time for this issue, so we're going to have to go to our final thoughts. And since you gave us the first issue, your final thoughts in about 30 seconds on these issues we brought today.
So, if we're talking directly about the first issue, I think that it's very important to note that a lot of the things that have happened here, which we were talking about, like the texts, have happened in the past. They aren't the end of the world. It's not some kind of unbelievable thing. We've had worse things be leaked through media before, and I think that what happened directly in the text is a good thing. I think that we are taking action more now against people than we should have been for the last couple of years. And overall, I think that we're moving towards a direction where even if this chance thing of having these things leaked was a bad thing, what we know is happening within the United States government is good. We know that these aren't just corporate drones or like some kind of unproductive hire. They are people that you can see are very motivated to what they're doing and that they have the interests of the United States and our security in mind.
Democrats are acting like losers right now. I watched the joint session of Congress a few weeks ago. Here's the thing. You're not going to win elections by refusing to stand and applaud for people who have survived cancer. You're not going to win elections by refusing to stand and applaud for people who suffered brain cancer, brain damage as a result of radical transgender policies. Democrats need to come out. They need to denounce what is happening across this country with Tesla. They need to mature, or frankly, they're not going to. Usually the party switches with midterms, but if things keep going the way that they are now, Democrats are not going to win a majority in the House or the Senate in the upcoming midterms.
All right. Thank you for your thoughts. I think our country is moving to a very scary place. I think that there are things happening within institutions and outside of them that have not been seen in our country before. I think that it would not be ridiculous to call what we are going towards a kind of soft fascism. The alliance between corporate interests and government power are historically seen in fascist governments, in Nazi Germany and in Mussolini's Italy. And I think that the removal of basic human rights that we have seen across the United States is sickening, and I think that it is very worrying for a lot of people. But I think in spite of all of that, there has to remain a willingness to fight for your issue and talk about it and argue it and not drop it, because that is how these systems just steamroll people. Never stop fighting, never stop discussing these issues, and please stay tuned for our next time where we will be discussing more issues. Have a good one.